Tommy had always believed that power would feel like freedom, a wide-open sky above a life he controlled with precision, but the reality unfolded more like a storm he could never quite outrun. His rise had been swift and impressive, the kind of story the world loves to retell: humble beginnings, relentless ambition, a few lucky breaks that were earned more than stumbled upon. But the higher he climbed, the more the landscape around him shifted. People stopped speaking to him and started speaking around him. Every conversation held a hidden note, every partnership a possible trap. From the outside, he was the man with everything: the money, the influence, the presence that filled every boardroom he entered. Yet behind closed doors, Tommy found himself living in a world where silence was never peaceful, and success felt like a debt collected daily. The first cracks in his peace were subtle, almost invisible. The late-night calls he justified as dedication, the insomnia he dismissed as temporary, the creeping suspicion he tried to label as caution. Wealth had expanded his reach, but it had also widened the circle of those who wanted something from him. Suddenly, every decision seemed like a battlefield of consequences. Every ally came with conditions. He felt himself drifting into a version of life where trust was both a luxury and a liability. People admired his power, but he began to realize that admiration often masked resentment, and sometimes even fear. And when people fear the person in the room, they rarely treat him with honesty. Tommy learned this the hard way. It was strange how money intensified everything: every expectation, every disappointment, every whisper of doubt. As his fortune grew, so did the number of people willing to tell him what he wanted to hear. Board members praised decisions they once would have questioned. Friends grew quiet when he entered the room, as if recalibrating their roles around his new identity. Prosperity didn't just change the dynamics, it rewired them. Tommy found himself surrounded but rarely understood, celebrated but rarely known. His wealth had built walls disguised as luxuries, silence disguised as respect, and distance disguised as authority. Power had given him influence, but it had stolen the intimacy of honest human connection. The paranoia didn't come overnight, but it settled in eventually, like dust gathering in corners he didn't think to clean. He became consumed with what could go wrong, deals slipping through his fingers, competitors plotting behind the scenes, employees betraying him for their own advancement. Each new venture came with twice the anxiety, because the stakes were no longer just business, they were personal. When he looked in the mirror, he saw the exhaustion first and the man second. Success had reshaped his reflection into something sharper, harder, less forgiving. He wondered when ambition had stopped being fuel and started being a fire that threatened to consume everything around him. It became clear that wealth had its own gravitational pull, dragging him into obligations that grew heavier with every achievement. He spent years believing the grind would slow once he made it, only to discover that reaching the summit meant facing storms no one warned him about. Investors wanted more, partners wanted faster, and the world demanded that he evolve endlessly or be left behind. He didn't just run a company anymore, the company ran him. Emails followed him into the night, boardroom disputes replayed in his sleep, and financial projections colored every thought. Wealth had promised independence, but all he felt was captivity disguised as opportunity. And somewhere in the chaos, Tommy realized he had traded pieces of himself without ever consciously agreeing to the sacrifice. He lost weekends first, then hobbies, then relationships. The man who once laughed loudly now measured every word. The man who once walked freely now moved as though every step had consequences. His home, filled with things few people could afford, felt like a museum dedicated to everything he no longer had: calm, simplicity, certainty. Money had insulated him from financial fear, yet amplified every other kind of fear. The world didn't feel larger with success, it felt tighter, as though the walls were closing in with every milestone. He thought often about the younger version of himself, the one who believed riches would solve everything. That version never imagined the loneliness that would shadow every accomplishment. He never imagined that with every new zero in his bank account, the cost to his peace of mind would multiply. Tommy had gained access to doors that were once locked shut, but he soon understood that some rooms were locked for a reason. In the pursuit of power, he had entered spaces where empathy was a weakness and vulnerability was ammunition. The environment demanded a version of him that was always on guard, always strategic, always calculating. There was no room left for the softer parts of who he used to be. Even success itself began to feel like a trap. The world expected him to maintain an image of unshakable control, and any sign of strain was seen as weakness. He couldn't tell people he was tired or overwhelmed. He couldn't admit that the empire he built weighed heavily on his shoulders. So he carried it in silence, in long nights staring at ceilings, in early mornings where his mind woke hours before his body did. Power came at a price, and peace was the currency he spent most frequently. He wondered if others saw through the polished exterior or if they believed their own illusions about what it meant to be wealthy. The pivotal moment came during yet another high-stakes crisis, one that should have invigorated him the way challenges once did. Instead, he felt numb. No rush of adrenaline, no spark of creativity, just an overwhelming sense of fatigue. It was then he understood that he wasn't just stressed, he was depleted. Power had taken more from him than he had ever consciously given. He realized that wealth, while capable of solving problems, also created its own ecosystem of demands that consumed his mental and emotional bandwidth. And as he sat alone in his office, city lights flickering against the glass, he asked himself a question he had avoided for years. Was the price worth it? That question hung in the air, more honest and more haunting than anything he had confronted before. Tommy knew that stepping back would mean disappointing others, risking his image, perhaps even facing the discomfort of redefining his identity outside of success. But he also knew that continuing as he was would cost him everything no amount of money could buy back. He didn't have an answer yet, but acknowledging the question was the first moment of real clarity he had felt in years. The truth was simple, though painful. Power had expanded his world while shrinking his soul. Wealth had elevated his status while eroding his serenity. And the lesson he faced was one many learned too late, that success can be a magnificent achievement, but peace is a priceless possession. In the end, Tommy's story stands as a quiet reminder that the pursuit of power often demands sacrifices we don't notice until we are already paying them. And sometimes the greatest success isn't found in climbing higher, but in knowing when to stop, step back, and reclaim the parts of ourselves we surrendered along the way.